Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, and I'm at my wit's end. Yes, Hurwitz is at his wit's end when it comes to a musicological issue at the end of the first movement of Beethoven's Eroica Symphony. Now, this has come up for discussion many, many times in these videos and in the comments with back and forth and whatnot. And if you are a musical beginner, you will learn that the world of classical music is based on the endless dispute over trivial details and the imbuing of them with way more significance than they deserve. But here's a point that I just think is worth making. I really do. And that's this. At the end of the first movement of the Eroica Symphony, there is a controversy over the trumpet parts. The controversy stems from the fact that Beethoven, in his day, had to use valveless trumpets. And so while the final apotheosis of the opening theme, which is do, 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 right? It comes back in the trumpets, but he didn't have the notes to play the continuation of the phrase at this particular point in the music, because he's going da 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 da. The tune is there, but it needs to be played by the trumpets. Well, the trumpet can only play the first bit, do 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 do, and then it stops. Now, obviously, as everyone has always known since Beethoven's own day, it has been accepted that had trumpets been able to play the second phrase, da, 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 he would have given it to the trumpets, but he couldn't. And so instead he just left them out. I mean, that's all he did. You hear the outline of that theme played in the woodwind section against the string accompaniment, and they're sort of going like that, if you can hear it at all. And it sounds terrible. It really does. There are a lot of things in Beethoven's symphonies that sounded terrible because he wasn't really interested in the limitations of his time. In some ways, he was writing for a future date. In aesthetically, conceptually. So anyway, we have this issue. Most performances up until, like the 60s or 70s or so, naturally just fixed the trumpet parts because today's trumpets can play anything. And so they have valves and they can play all the notes, not just the one. They're not just limited to what's in the particular key the music happens to be in. And so they fixed those trumpet parts so the trumpet plays the whole phrase. And it sounds marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. Here, with Paul Kletsky, the Czech Philharmonic, is what that sounds like. And I'm going to play you not just that trumpet little tiny bit, but to the end of the actual musical sentence, as it were, because you see how much sense it makes and how beautiful it creates a climax for the entire passage. Here it is. That's marvelous, right? It's Beethoven's Eroica. It's triumphant and it's fabulous. There you go. Now, since then, we've become literalists, and people have decided, no, we have to play it exactly the way Beethoven wrote it, even though it's stupid, and even though we know he probably would have done it otherwise if he could have, and even though it doesn't really make musical sense, and it just ruins the effect of that climax, because what happens is that interpreters basically have two choices. They can let the trumpets roar out, and then just not have them for the second half of the phrase, which immediately cuts the climax off prematurely, number one, and makes it sound like it's an accompaniment in search of a tune. Or they can tamp down the trumpet so it's not too loud and just pull the rug out from the climax entirely and make the whole thing sound ridiculous and clogged. Well, here's one of those. This is Adam Fischer with the Danish Chamber Orchestra on Naxos doing the second thing. Here it is. Yich. Now, this is with a chamber orchestra. Supposedly you have greater clarity and all of that stuff. It doesn't sound clearer at all. It sounds compacted and small and not eruptive. I mean, Beethoven's building up this huge climax and it just fails to arrive. So there you go. Just to prove that, let's listen to the arrival again with Kletsky and Supraphon. Now, is there any serious question about which of those versions sounds better for any number of reasons? But just to have the trumpet play just those few notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 notes, whatever it is, and we're fine. You know, the truth of the matter is that people make a big deal of this because it's obvious and because it involves changing the actual notes that the instruments play. But in reality, in any interpretation of this symphony, or most symphonies, there will be more stuff done to the text in terms of phrasing and articulation and accents and tempo choice and rhythm, things that are far more destructive of what Beethoven potentially wrote than just adding those 8 trumpet notes. But we hear them. They stand out like a sore thumb. It would be like adding cymbal crashes. So people make a big deal of it. And today's literalists particularly insist that we should leave it the way Beethoven wrote it. Okay, fine. So there are 2 basic, schools of thought about it. Leave it the way Beethoven wrote it and do what you got to do. All of which is even more destructive to what Beethoven's intent was probably than fixing it, or you could fix it. Naturally, as you can tell, I am of the fix-it school. I just think it's a crime not to fix issues that come up. Remember Tovey's fabulous dictum that is, musical scholarship itself is not obliged to insist on the restoration of conditions that ought never to have existed in the first instance. Well, trumpets that can't play the right notes is a condition that ought never to have existed in the first instance, and fixing it is a charity. It's a mercy. It's giving Beethoven a little bit of Rachmanis, as we say in Yiddish, showing him some compassion and fixing a problem. So there we go. That's the issue. But here is where it makes me absolutely raving crazy. And the rant beginneth. It's people who say, as Harnoncourt did first, that Beethoven deliberately, was disinclined to fix that trumpet line. This is even more speculative than saying that Beethoven would have fixed that trumpet line. Let's put it, or they're equally speculative. Let's put it that way. Let's admit it. Because that represents the defeat of the hero, which defeat is then adumbrated in the ensuing funeral march. Oh, where do we begin? Well, we begin with the observation that musicians are not necessarily the brightest bulbs in the chandelier of intellectual attainment. That is the dumbest argument. I mean, first of all, we have to accept the idea that the first movement is a portrait of a hero. Okay, I buy that. It's called the Eroica Symphony. Originally, it was called Bonaparte, Napoleon Bonaparte, remember? So yeah, okay, here's the hero. Then there's a funeral march. Obviously, in the funeral march, someone's dead, and they're being commemorated in this funeral march. Fine. Let them be commemorated in the funeral march. I accept all of those. It's obvious, as the music seems to say that without any question about it. But here's the issue. How can you possibly maintain that in that 8-bar phrase of music, or 4 bars, or whatever it is, between the first phrase with the trumpet and the second phrase without the trumpet, the hero is defeated? Whence cometh the concept of defeat there? Or you hear the way the phrase concludes, right? Is there anything at all that suggests a defeat from there until the end of the whole movement? The triumphant ending of the entire movement, which ends with complete, satisfied, sated, glorious happiness? There is nothing in that music that substantiates the idea that Beethoven wanted to anticipate the defeat of the hero. Nothing. Zero. Zippo. I mean, the idea is preposterous. Music can't do that within that span of time, within the notes that Beethoven wrote, at the tempo and dynamics that he wrote them, in the key that he selected. It's impossible. It's a stupid, ridiculous concept. Straight off. It runs diametrically opposed to the expressive content of the music, which, remember, we're supposed to hear it as it comes. We're not supposed to know in advance that there's a funeral march coming. And so what we heard retroactively must be the defeat of the hero. I mean, it's just, okay. So then there's another issue of it. The other issue is, of course, the funeral march. What does that have to do with the defeat of the hero? Funeral marches are played at funerals, obviously. They're played when someone dies. The fact that the funeral is dead, that the hero is dead, doesn't mean he was defeated. It doesn't mean he was defeated at all. It means he died. I mean, he was a person. He died. Great men die all the time. And when great men die, they are often commemorated in large public ceremonies of grieving, often characterized by funeral processions, for example. The hero could have been the most successful hero that ever lived. And he would still get a funeral march when he died because the expression of public grief at his death is independent of the manner of his death. So for people saying, well, Beethoven defeated the hero because there's a funeral march that comes next. Well, that is to totally misunderstand the whole purpose of a funeral march. I mean, if the hero is crushed or killed in battle, chances are he wouldn't have a whole funeral march because there's no body. I mean, you have to have a body, you have to have a procession, you have to set it up. It takes time. You have to hire a caterer. You have to have bunting. You have to have ticker tape. You got to have horses. It's a whole production, right? Well, my point is that there's no suggestion in the music itself, that the hero gets defeated. There is a big suggestion that at some point he died. How he died, why he died, Beethoven doesn't care. He's not writing a symphony that describes the life of the guy day by day, or episode by episode, or in the Battle of Waterloo, or whatever. He's simply expressing the grief on the death of his hero, or whoever is the subject of that funeral march. And so to say that this little tiny trumpet phrase, missing its last 8 notes, by leaving out those last 8 notes and totally undermining that climax in the moment of its performance, by pulling the rug out, as I said, from the ending of the first movement, somehow is better than fixing the problem in the first place, is insane. That's ridiculous. It's nuts. It's bullshit. It's anti-musical. Absolutely, totally, and completely anti-unmusical. And, Nicholas Harnoncourt, for all that he was a musical genius and did all kinds of things, and, he had this thing about coming up with rhetorical ideas to underpin his sometimes very eccentric interpretive options. And some other listeners have latched on to that concept. But I'm telling you right now, folks, it makes no sense. You can believe whatever you want. I mean, you can believe that Beethoven was illustrating the life of a head of lettuce, if it makes you happy. But the music is totally, absolutely crystal clear in expressing unalloyed triumph and happiness through the end of the first movement. And nothing that you can do to those trumpet parts is going to change that. You can only diminish it. And why would we want to do that? That's the question. Why would we want to do that? So there you have it. You can make the comparisons yourself. You can listen to your own recordings. But that's my view on it. And this invention of stories to justify anti-musical or unmusical interpretive choices, oh, that pisses me off. It really does. And that's why I keep on listening, and you should too. Thank you for joining me, and Take care.